Hello, my friends. Before we start, please like and subscribe.
I went out walking that night because my power was out. The storm had rolled through just before midnight. My apartment felt suffocating without the hum of the fridge, so I decided to take a walk until the lights came back on. I live in a small town in West Virginia, tucked between hills and forest. That night, the air felt wrong, flat like sound had been turned down. The streetlights were out, but the moon was bright enough to see the road. I followed my usual route. What didn't make sense was how empty everything felt. Not just quiet, emptied, like the town had been hollowed out. I walked past the diner on Main Street. The windows were dark, but the chairs inside were neatly stacked. I kept going. About 10 minutes in, I noticed I hadn't seen a single candle or phone screen in any window. No generators. No dogs barking. I stopped in the middle of the street and listened. Nothing. Even the frogs were gone. That's when I realized the road felt different under my feet. My steps didn't echo. They didn't make much sound at all, like the pavement was absorbing it. I shined my flashlight down. The road looked normal, but the beam didn't travel far. It was swallowed by darkness. I reached the four-way intersection at the center of town and slowed. The stop signs were missing. Not knocked over, gone. The poles were still there, bare and rusted, like the signs had never existed. My heart started to pound. I turned onto Oak Street, planning to head back toward my apartment. After a block, I noticed something else missing. Street names. Every sign was gone. I picked up my pace. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped. They stopped. I turned slowly, flashlight raised. A man stood about 20 feet back. He looked ordinary. Jeans, work jacket, baseball cap pulled low. "Hey," he said, "you shouldn't be out this late." "Power's out," I said. "I was just walking until—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "That's why I came." I frowned. "The signs are gone." He smiled slightly. "They do that. Disappear when they're not needed anymore." I took a step back. "I'm heading home." He nodded. "You should." I turned to walk away. "Don't run," he added. "Because if you run, they'll notice you faster." My stomach dropped. "Who will?" I whispered. He didn't answer. I walked, slowly, back the way I'd come. After a few steps, I glanced back. The man was gone. The street behind me stretched farther than it should have, the houses growing smaller like perspective was breaking down. I reached where my building should have been. It wasn't there. The lot was empty. No building, no cars, just cracked concrete and weeds. "No," I whispered. The flashlight flickered. Behind me, something shifted. I didn't turn. I remembered what my grandfather used to say. If the hills go quiet, don't ask questions. Just go where you're going like nothing's wrong. I walked straight through the empty lot toward the river. Shapes moved at the edge of my vision. Too tall, too thin, but I didn't look. Something whispered my name. I didn't respond. Suddenly, my foot hit gravel. The river came into view. At the edge stood an old wooden footbridge. I froze. The bridge had collapsed years ago. Now it stood whole and solid. On the bridge were people, dozens of them. Men, women, children, standing still, facing the water. None of them moved. None of them spoke. The man from the street stepped out beside me. "You can stop here," he said. "Everyone else did." I shook my head. "I'm going home." He looked almost sad. "There is no home." I stepped onto the bridge. The wood creaked loudly, the first real sound I'd heard in hours. The figures on the bridge turned their heads toward me in perfect unison. Their faces were blank, erased. The man grabbed my arm. "If you cross, you won't come back." I looked at the river. The current was fast, loud, real. I yanked my arm free and ran. The bridge shook as I sprinted. The figures reached for me, their movements jerky, but they didn't follow past the midpoint. The moment my foot hit the far bank, everything snapped. Sound rushed back. Crickets. Water. My flashlight blazed bright. Behind me, the bridge was gone. Just broken posts in the river. I collapsed, sobbing. When I finally made it back, the streetlights were on. My building stood exactly where it should be. The next morning, I checked the local paper. A small article sat on page 3. Town declared uninhabited since 1998. Apparently, a clerical error had kept our town on maps for 20 years after everyone was relocated. Official records said no one lived here. I packed my things that same day. I don't walk at night anymore. Because sometimes, when the world goes quiet, it's not empty. It's waiting. I've always been drawn to mountains, not for the views or the challenge, but for the sense of isolation. The way the world shrinks to rocks, trees, and sky, it feels like truth. That's what I thought until last September, when something went horribly wrong on a remote ridge in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. I went with 2 friends, Mark and Elena. We were experienced hikers, used to backcountry trips. We planned a 3-day loop along a lesser-known ridge far from marked trails. I felt confident. I shouldn't have. The first day was perfect. Clear skies, crisp air, the scent of pine and wet earth. We joked, took photos, and marveled at the cliffs and valleys stretching endlessly below us. By nightfall, we camped in a small clearing near a creek. I remember staring at the stars, feeling utterly alive. The second day began with a fog so thick it felt almost solid. It rolled down the valleys, curling around trees, and the trail disappeared entirely. Our GPS wavered, showing coordinates that didn't exist, as though the mountains themselves were hiding from us. Every ridge we reached looked identical, and no matter which way we turned, the paths repeated. By midday, we realized we were lost. Not just off-trail lost, but impossibly lost. The mountains didn't follow the rules we knew. Rocks stacked unnaturally along the path. Fallen trees leaned to block directions, and shadows shifted as if alive. Mark laughed nervously, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. By evening, we found a clearing and tried to make camp. The fog was thicker, almost clinging to our skin. The silence was unnatural. Not a bird, not a breeze, not a single sound except the faint hum of our own movements. I lay awake that night, staring into the darkness, certain of eyes on me. Around midnight, I saw it, a figure standing beyond the firelight. Tall, thin, limbs bent unnaturally. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I felt its gaze. I froze. Mark and Elena slept unaware. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished into the fog. The next morning, our confusion turned to terror. The ridge we had camped on was gone. Trees and rocks had shifted. Streams flowed in directions that made no sense. The mountains had rearranged themselves. Our radios were dead. My GPS was useless. Every step felt like walking deeper into a trap. On the third day, we stumbled upon a cabin, though it didn't belong in the landscape. Its walls were warped, the roof sagging at impossible angles. Windows were narrow and crooked, doors larger than logic allowed. Desperation pushed us inside. The air was thick and metallic. The walls were covered in hundreds of names, carved deep into the wood. Some were familiar, missing hikers from old reports. Others I did not recognize. And then, carved freshly, was my own name. My heart stopped. The cabin seemed alive. Shadows stretched and twisted unnaturally along the walls. One of my friends, Elena, leaned against a post, and the floor beneath her rippled, bending as though breathing. She screamed, and I turned. She was gone. Mark grabbed my arm, but the cabin had grown larger, corners folding into darkness. I ran, out into the fog, calling, but my voice vanished. Every familiar ridge had become alien. Cliffs appeared where there had been flat ground. Trees leaned into the path to block my escape. Hunger and exhaustion melted hours into a blur. Eventually, I stumbled onto a small plateau overlooking a lake. The fog lifted slightly, and I saw the figure again on the opposite ridge. Taller than I remembered, bending forward, watching me. My body froze. Then, slowly, it raised a hand, and the ground beneath me moved, sliding me toward the water. I plunged in, cold water shocking me awake, and swam shore. The mountains looked normal again. Trails were in their correct places, trees straight, streams running as expected. I hiked back to civilization, exhausted, terrified, but alive. Authorities searched the area, but found nothing. No cabin, no warped trees, no missing friends. Weeks later, I received a photograph in the mail. No return address. It was taken from a ridge I'd camped on, fog curling over the peaks. And there they were, Mark and Elena, standing at the edge of the fog, calm, eyes hollow. And behind them, the figure, taller and darker than ever, watching. Then I understood. The mountains hadn't taken them. They had been waiting, preserved, and now the mountains had sent a message. Months have passed. I've tried to return to a normal life, but I know the figure still watches. Sometimes I feel it in the corner of my vision. I know it is only a matter of time before it calls again. The difference this time is that I'm ready. Next time, I will go willingly. Because I know the mountains keep their memory, and they never forget those who wander too far. I always thought I could handle the backcountry. I've been hiking alone for years, sleeping in tents under open skies, carrying nothing but a backpack and confidence. That confidence lasted until last summer, when I decided to explore a remote section of Yosemite National Park I'd read about online, an unmarked loop far from the main trails. The morning started perfectly. The sun slanted through the pines, birds chirped, and the smell of damp earth and wildflowers filled the air. I felt alive in a way only the wilderness can make you feel. The trail was narrow but clear at first, winding around granite boulders and along the edge of a creek. I paused occasionally to take photos, to breathe in the world, and to tell myself that this was what it meant to be free. By mid-afternoon, I came across a fork in the path. One trail climbed toward a ridge. The other descended steeply into a thick forest. There was no marker, nothing to tell me where it led, but I chose the descent. Something about the shadows pulling me downward felt magnetic. Almost immediately, I realized I had made a mistake. The forest thickened unnaturally. The trees were older, their bark blackened and twisted, like they had been warped by some terrible fire long ago. The underbrush clawed at my legs as I moved, and the sunlight barely reached the forest floor. I began to notice that the usual noises of a forest, birds, insects, wind through leaves, had vanished. It was too quiet. That's when I saw the first footprints. They were large, human-shaped, and pressed deep into the soil. But something was wrong. The prints were too long, too narrow, and every set led in the same direction, toward the heart of the forest, and none led out. My stomach churned. I debated turning back, but the path behind me seemed to vanish into dense thickets I couldn't penetrate. I kept moving forward, heart hammering. Eventually, I stumbled into a small clearing. In its center was a pond, black as obsidian, perfectly still. I knelt to take a drink, but as I looked into the water, I froze. My reflection didn't move. My lips didn't align when I whispered my own name. And behind me, I saw shapes in the water. Dozens of faces pressed against the surface, distorted in silent screams. I spun around. The clearing was empty. The forest stood still, silent, watching. Panic surged. I ran. The forest didn't help me. Every path I tried twisted back toward the pond. Every landmark I thought I recognized vanished. It was as if the forest itself had rearranged to keep me inside. Shadows moved unnaturally, and I thought I saw figures between the trees. Tall, thin, humanoid shapes with elongated limbs, faces pale and expressionless. They didn't run toward me, but I knew they were watching. I stumbled into another clearing, and there was again the pond, only larger, surrounded by rocks carved with symbols I didn't recognize. They were jagged, uneven, like claws scraping into the stone. The black water rippled slightly, though no wind blew. And I knew the figures were just beyond the edge, waiting. I wanted to scream, but my throat had gone dry. My mind raced for a plan, a way out, anything. Then I remembered an old hiking rule my father used to say: fear is the forest's leash. The more afraid you are, the tighter it holds you. I forced myself to stop. Breathe. Look. I spoke aloud. I see you. I'm here, and I am not afraid. The figures froze. The ripples in the pond stilled. The air itself seemed to pause. One of the figures stepped closer, tilting its head in a way that made my skin crawl. Its eyes, empty black holes, seemed to pierce straight through me. And for the first time, I felt something like curiosity. I walked slowly, deliberately toward the edge of the pond, keeping my eyes on it. The other figures didn't move. They simply watched. My heart pounded, but I didn't run. I didn't scream. Step by step, I walked through the forest, unafraid, asserting my presence. Hours, maybe minutes later, I don't know, I found the path again. The normal trail, clear and maintained, just as if the unmarked sections I had walked through had never existed. The sunlight was fading behind the ridges, and I stumbled to my car, trembling, my hands and legs scratched from branches. I didn't stop driving until I was miles from the park, certain I would never return. I told no one about the pond, the faces, the figures. Most people would have called me insane. Maybe I was, but I survived, and I realized something that changed everything I thought I knew about the forest. It didn't want to kill me. It wanted to test me, to see if I could endure. I spent the next few nights in my apartment replaying the experience in my mind. The pond, the faces, the figures, all of it haunted my thoughts. But I no longer felt fear. I felt connected. And that's when I noticed it. In my apartment, the air sometimes shifts as if the forest has moved in. Shadows stretch in impossible ways. And every so often, when I catch my reflection in a mirror, I see them. Just for a second. Pale, watching, waiting. Not to harm me, at least not yet, but to remind me that I belong in some way to the forest now. The national parks are not just protected land. They are alive. They remember. They wait. And sometimes, when you stray too far from the path, they notice you. I survived, but the forest never truly lets anyone go. I thought this cruise would be the escape I needed. The Mariner's Veil promised a week of sun, buffet food, and endless ocean views. Boarding in Miami, I felt the excitement of freedom, leaving my city life behind. But the ship itself gave me pause. It floated like a monument, its decks spotless, gleaming, and for some reason, its scale felt wrong. Immense, almost unnatural. The first day was uneventful, if a bit strange. The other passengers laughed, lounged by the pool, took selfies. I wandered the corridors, and each time I passed the lower decks, I felt a cold draft that shouldn't have existed. Shadows moved where there were none to cast them. Crew members smiled at me with a precision that unnerved me. Their eyes never wavered, never blinked fully. That night, I awoke to a low humming sound, almost like a distant engine vibrating through the floorboards. I tried to sleep, but the sound persisted. When I rose to investigate, I noticed the hallway stretching impossibly, longer than it should have been. Doors I knew well were gone, replaced by blank walls. My cabin vanished. By the second day, passengers started disappearing. A man didn't return for breakfast. A family vanished from a pool. Crew members insisted they had left voluntarily, but I noticed the subtle panic in the other passengers' faces. Something was feeding on this ship, and it wasn't water or food. The fog came that evening, thick, white, curling across the decks, swallowing the horizon and the sun alike. The horn sounded, not in long blasts, but short, staccato bursts. No one else seemed to hear it, or they ignored it. I ventured toward the deck, but passengers froze, staring blindly into the mist. Faces pale, eyes empty. I felt the first tendrils of fear creep into me. I tried to find a way off the ship. Hallways twisted impossibly. Staircases led to nowhere. Doors opened to rooms I didn't recognize. Mirrors reflected strangers instead of myself. Some with hollow eyes, mouths opening silently. I understood then. The ship was alive. It was reshaping reality, feeding not just on bodies, but on fear, confusion, and panic. By the third night, I had no plan but to escape. I found a lifeboat and jumped. The water was unnatural black, viscous, almost resisting me. I paddled frantically, but behind me, the Mariner's Veil loomed impossibly, decks stretching into the fog. Figures pressed against the railings, faceless, pale, reaching. Hours, or maybe days, passed. Time had no meaning. Finally, land appeared. Pale sand, stretching endlessly, a dense forest beyond. Relief surged. I ran to the shore, only to freeze. The missing passengers were there, wandering like ghosts, pale, hollow-eyed, silent. And in their midst, a woman I had glimpsed in the fog stood, hair plastered to her face, eyes black. "You can't leave," she said, her voice filling my head. "You belong here now." Panic surged, but the sand shifted beneath my feet, pulling me back. The horizon curved unnaturally. I realized with horror, the ship had followed me. This wasn't land. It was a creation of its will, a trap extending beyond the water. I sank to my knees, but then I noticed something. The faceless figures weren't moving with panic. They were calm. Their fear had ended, and the ship treated them differently. I realized then that the mariner's veil thrived on terror. Fear empowered it. Acceptance bound its victims. I stopped struggling. I focused, studied the figures, the sand, the shifting fog. I observed rather than panicked. Slowly I stood. The sand solidified beneath me. The fog lifted slightly. The path through the dunes opened. The woman in the center looked at me, uncertain. "You see it," she said. "You understand. Few ever do." I did. The ship wasn't trying to kill me. It was testing me, feeding on panic, shaping reality, preying on those who surrendered to fear. By confronting it without despair, I had found a way to survive. I walked through the forest, fully aware that I was still inside its world, but no longer a prisoner. The faceless passengers followed me, not as threats, but as witnesses. The ship's presence pulsed, immense, patient. It was vast, sentient, ancient, but it was not invincible. I made a choice. I could return to the ocean, drift endlessly, or I could embrace what I had learned, walk freely within its domain. I chose the latter. Now I am part of it, not consumed, not destroyed, but aware. I walk its corridors, invisible to fear. The mariner's veil drifts beyond maps, beyond radar, waiting for the next passengers. Most will succumb. Some vanish. A rare few, like me, confront it and survive. I guide them. I teach them. I am no longer a passenger. I am its sentinel. And in that truth, I am free. I always thought the stories about Alaska exaggerating people's fears were excuses made by folks who couldn't handle the cold. I believed fear came from animals, accidents, bad weather, things you could point at and name. That belief didn't survive my last winter above the Arctic Circle. I was working as a communications technician for a small private contractor hired to upgrade emergency radio towers scattered across the North Slope. The job required short stays at unmanned relay stations, metal huts perched on ridges, connected to the world only by antennas and fuel drums. Fly in, work for a few days, fly out. No permanent settlements nearby. No roads, just tundra and sky. The tower I was assigned to in February sat on a low rise overlooking a frozen inlet. The pilot dropped me off with supplies for 4 days and promised to return if weather allowed. Before he left, he looked at the horizon longer than necessary. "If the fog rolls in," he said, "stay inside. Doesn't matter what you hear." I asked him what he meant. He smiled the way people do when they don't want to sound foolish. Just stay inside. The first day passed quietly. I checked connections, replaced corroded wiring, logged signal strength. The cold was brutal but manageable. The silence felt clean, stripped down to essentials. That night, I noticed something odd. My shadow didn't look right. The station's exterior light cast a pale glow across the snow, and when I stepped outside to check the generator, my shadow stretched long behind me, as expected. But it lagged. Not much, just enough to make my stomach tighten. When I stopped walking, it took a fraction of a second longer to stop. I blamed the uneven light and went back inside. The next morning, the fog rolled in. It wasn't like normal fog. It didn't drift or thin with the wind. It arrived as a wall and stayed there, swallowing the landscape so completely that the world ended 10 feet from the door. The sky and ground merged into the same dull white, horizon erased. The radio crackled with static, but no voice. Satellite phone showed no signal. I decided to wait it out. By afternoon, I started hearing movement outside. Not footsteps, not animals, something softer, a shuffling sound, like snow being brushed aside by something large and careful. I watched from the window until my eyes ached, but the fog hid everything. When the sound stopped, I felt worse than when it was there. That evening, I noticed my shadow again, this time on the interior wall. The overhead light cast it sharply behind me as I cooked, but when I raised my arm, the shadow hesitated. When I lowered it, the shadow remained raised for a moment before following. I shut off the light. In the darkness, I felt watched. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I had the sensation of something standing too close, waiting for me to notice it. At some point in the night, I heard breathing that didn't match my own, slow, steady, patient. I turned on the light. My shadow was standing upright on a far wall. Not attached to me, not mimicking my movements. It was shaped like a person, but the proportions were wrong. Too long in the arms, neck slightly bent, head tilted as if listening. It didn't move. I backed toward the door, heart pounding so hard I felt dizzy. The shadow raised its hand. I screamed and slammed the light off, plunging the room into darkness. I stood there shaking, waiting for something to touch me, to grab me, to end it. Nothing happened. I didn't turn the light back on. The fog persisted into the next day. The radio remained dead. The sounds outside grew more frequent. Slow movement circling the station, never approaching the door, never leaving. I realized then that the thing outside wasn't trying to get in. It already was. Every time I moved, I felt a faint delay in myself, like my body was arriving a split second after my intention, like something else was deciding whether to follow along. I remembered something my grandmother used to say when I was a kid, warning me not to play games with my shadow at dusk. Some things only exist when you move, she'd said. They don't like being ignored. So I stopped moving. I sat on the floor, lights off, breathing slow and shallow. Hours passed. My muscles screamed. My mind raced, but I stayed still. Eventually, the breathing sound faded. When I finally dared to move again, it felt like stepping out of deep water. Heavy, resistant, but it was just me. My shadow followed properly, obedient again. The fog lifted shortly after sunset. The pilot returned the next morning, surprised to see me waiting outside. He asked how it went. Quiet, I said. He nodded like that confirmed something he already knew. Back in town, I filed my report. Equipment functioning. Fog delay. No incidents. That wasn't the lie. The lie is what I tell myself now, years later, living in a place where streetlights still cast long shadows at night. Sometimes when I move too quickly, I feel it again. That faint hesitation, that question in the dark. And when that happens, I stop. Because whatever waits in Alaska doesn't chase. It follows. I've been looking forward to being home alone for months. My parents were going out of town for a long weekend, leaving me alone in the house for the first time since I could remember. At 16, it felt like freedom. I could watch what I wanted, eat whatever I wanted, stay up as late as I wanted. It was mine, all mine. Pause 1.5s. The first night went smoothly. I ordered pizza, sprawled on the couch, and watched movies until my eyes burned. The street outside was quiet, just the usual suburban stillness. The kind of stillness that makes you aware of every little creak and groan in a house you've lived in for years. That's when it started. I smelled it first. Something like smoke, faint and acrid, though there was nothing burning in the house. I checked the kitchen, the living room, even the laundry room. Everything was fine. I shrugged it off, blaming the oven I had used earlier, though nothing was wrong with it. Then came a knock. Soft, at first, a polite, deliberate rap on the front door. My heart stopped. My parents always locked the doors before leaving. No one should be here. I peeked through the window. Empty porch. No shadows. No movement. Nothing. I backed away, trying to convince myself it was the wind, a branch, maybe a stray animal. But then it came again. Louder, more insistent. Hello. I call, my voice trembling. Silence. I grabbed the baseball bat from behind the door. My pulse raced. The knocking stopped. Then the footsteps began. Inside the house. Slow, dragging, purposeful. Coming from the hallway leading to my bedroom. I froze. My limbs refused to move. My phone did. No signal. Even a house phone didn't work. I was alone, completely cut off. The footsteps paused outside my room. Then a whisper, soft and deliberate, drifted through the air. You shouldn't be alone. I scrambled toward the kitchen, thinking I could barricade myself there, but the layout of the house had changed. Hallways seemed longer, corners darker. Every door I passed felt unfamiliar. I realized I wasn't in my house anymore. Not really. I ran upstairs, hoping the attic would be a refuge. The stairs creaked beneath me, but the sound wasn't natural. It groaned, dragged, like something alive was moving beneath me. I reached the attic door and yanked it open. The space looked normal at first, cramped, filled with boxes of old junk. I crouched behind a pile of furniture, clutching the bat, trying to steady my breath. Silence. For a few moments, I thought I was safe. Then I saw it, my reflection, in a small, cracked mirror leaning against the wall. It wasn't me. Not quite. The eyes were darker, deeper than any human eyes should be. My lips curved into a smile I had never made. My skin, pale, almost translucent, wrong. I stumbled backward, tripping over a box. When I looked again, the mirror was empty. The attic had changed. The walls stretched, shadows twisting and stretching in impossible ways. Whispering, my name, over and over. Then I heard a voice behind me. My voice. You belong here now. I turned. My double was standing there. Same hair, same clothes, same height. Calm, patient, smiling. I tried to run, but every step I took brought me closer to it. My hands reached for the figure, but they passed through like smoke. Then it touched me, cold, impossibly cold. My vision went black. When I woke, I was on the couch. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The house looked normal. My parents were still away. My phone worked. Relief washed over me. It had been a dream, a nightmare. I went to the mirror in the hallway. My reflection smiled. Not me, my double, waiting. I ran outside, down the street, past my neighbors' houses, past the familiar streetlights, until I reached a friend's house. I told them everything. They didn't believe me. The police found nothing. No signs of entry. No shadows. No whispers. Just me, alone, and a lingering terror in my mind. I returned home that evening. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I stared at the hallway mirror. It winked. And then I realized I hadn't escaped. The house hadn't let me go. It had claimed me. My reflection had stepped out, and I had stepped in. Now, every mirror I pass, I wonder which one will be home alone next.
Let me know your thoughts in the comments. See you next time.